Thank you for turning to page 121. Today we're going to take a look at a magic item out of the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, Daern's Instant Fortress. It's an intriguing little magic item. It was a kind of a new idea to me when I first read it back in 1980. A little cube that turns into this massive fortress. So we're going to take a look at the pros and cons of the magic item, some house rules we've developed for it, and a way one of my players weaponized it, and maybe make even more house rules for it. So today on page 121, out of the original Dungeon Master's Guide, Daern's Instant Fortress. All right, Daern's Instant Fortress out of the Dungeon Master's Guide, page 142. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can get a better look at what it says here. So Daern's Instant Fortress. This metal cube is of small size. I usually make it about 3 inches by 3 inches by 3 inches. But when activated, it grows to form a metal tower 20 foot square and 30 feet high, with arrow slits on all sides and machicolated battlement to top it. The metal extending 10 feet into the ground. It is a small door, which will only open in the command of the owner of the fortress, knock spells notwithstanding. The adamantite walls of Daern's Instant Fortress are totally unaffected by normal weapons other than those of catapult type. I include giant rocks in that, by the way, if giants throwing rocks. The hull can take 200 points of damage before the tower collapses. Note the damage sustained is cumulative. The fortress cannot be repaired, although a wish will restore 10 points of damage sustained. It requires but 1 round to cause the fortress to spring up, but the person or persons nearby must be careful. Must be careful not to be caught in the sudden growth, or else they will sustain 10 to 100 hit points of damage. The door will always be facing the owner of the device when it becomes a fortress, and will open and close instantly at his command. So, pretty straightforward magic item. It's a little cube that grows and becomes this nasty fortress. A couple things to unpack out of the description. Basically, I believe the way this was designed, the magic item where it's brought out, is that you're supposed to set the cube on the ground, say the magic word, and then the doorway opens. Now, you have battlements atop the fortress, but there's no mention of any way to get to the battlements other than climbing the wall or flying up to them. So I amended it pretty early on and said that there was indeed another hatch to the roof from inside the fortress, and it worked the exact same way as the doorway, the main doorway. So in any Daern's Instant Fortress I give out, there's 2 doorways, the one at the ground level and then the hatch up above. Interestingly, if soldiers are up on top of the fortress and the owner is not present and the hatch is closed, they're stuck. They can't open the hatch unless he's there to open it. And their only other choice is to go over the side for a 30-foot fall. Kind of interesting. The fortress itself just pops up and it extends 10 feet into the ground. So here are a couple of ways that the fortress is used in my game. This was done primarily by an older player who hasn't played my campaign in almost 40 years. His name was Pat, no relation to my son Patrick, and no, my son Patrick was not named for him. Pat left our campaign in the very early 80s, but he was probably the most gifted natural role player I ever gamed with. And he's very clever. He could read some of this stuff and come up with some ideas. So he got a Daern's Instant Fortress from me for his character, Lord Sluggo. And Lord Sluggo came up with a couple of innovative ways to use the fortress. One was there was a situation where I wasn't the DM, I was a player, and my character and his character, Lord Sluggo, were at odds over something. So Lord Sluggo knew I was very proud of an inn I had recently opened called the Do Step Inn, and he put the fortress on the roof and said the command word, and the fortress grew and crushed my inn and caused all kinds of mayhem and damage. We were both neutral alignments, and back in the Wild and Woolly early days, that was actually an allowable thing. He did get a couple of patrons in that one, but again, I think he was chaotic neutral, so the DM let it slide. So we had a little bit of enmity between us, and that was one of the ways he kind of paid me back for some stuff. So I just thought that was a pretty funny way to do it. Another way he did is I was DMing a game, and I had a big horde of orcs approaching, and Sluggo was about 8th level at the time, and Sluggo also had a shield that allowed him to fly for 6 turns a day, 1 turn at a time. So he used that to good effect. He flew over the orc horde, dropped the cube, and said the command word. The cube sprung up right in the middle of the horde. He then landed on top of the cube and was able to fight from in there, and then the rest of the party was able to get there and help him. So he had this fortress pop up, squishing a bunch of the people in the army, and then in the heart of the army, they had to deal with this little fortress that just popped up. So it was pretty effective use. And then one other time, I described a narrow mine running under the ground, and Pat had noticed that this extends 10 feet under the ground. So he simply went to the entrance of the mine where it would be most shallow, said the command word, the base shot down 10 feet into the mine, collapsing it, and then his cube fell a little bit, but the fortress took a little damage, but nothing bad. Once the ground stabilized, he went down, shrunk the cube back down, using his shield of flight, picked it up, and off he went. So there's a couple of different ways he actually weaponized the cube. So we had to change some of the rules. And the rules we changed is you must place it deliberately on the ground and then say the command word. Now, you can still do this in a crowded area or whatever. You could do it in a dungeon and have the thing just pop up and smash out the walls and stuff. That's perfectly allowable. But it's important to note that you can't just drop it and make it expand, at least at my table anymore. I gave him lots of props for those good uses, but we didn't want everybody walking around doing that. I've given out a handful of these over the last 40 years. This is not a real common item for me. I think in my current game there is one. I think Roy has it. And so we kept it from being weaponized because, as it says, if you're next to it when it springs up, it does 10 to 100 points of damage. Back in AD&D in the earliest days, and even still, 10 to 100 is a considerable amount of damage. It's something in the neighborhood of 55 points of damage on average. So it was considerable damage to have a player character have. Now, this item, I feel, can be given to somebody as low as about 7th or 8th level, and they can use it to adventure in. It's a great place to sleep and things like that. I had one player decide that he was going to build his keep in a certain area, and he used the fortress to establish the area. While his keep was being built, he operated out of the Daern Fortress, which is a pretty neat idea. So the other stuff on the keep itself is we've had to kind of adjudicate some rules over the years. So here's a couple of things that we had to decide. First off, can you teleport into the Daern Fortress? And the answer is yes, you can. If you are doing it blind, you're a mile away and you're just going to teleport in, it goes as a blind teleport unless you've been there and studied it. And I would allow that even if it's been moved from place to place, as long as you're familiar with the fortress itself while it's expanded. If it was carefully studied by you before then yes, I would let you carefully teleport in as if you had carefully studied. Otherwise, line of sight, if you crawled up the outside wall, looked through one of the archery ports, and then you could teleport in that way. You could also dimension door the same way because that's line of sight. You can also, any kind of shape change form that could just naturally wriggle through the archery port, also allowable. So there are ways to get into the fortress. One other way would be if you can go ethereal. You're on the ethereal plane, you step into the area where the fortress is, and then you come back to the prime material plane. So there's a couple of different ways you can get into the fortress other than walking through the door. One other thing is this is not any kind of Lehman's Hut situation, which a lot of players think it is. It's not conditioned in any way. It's not heated, it's not cooled. You have to do that. It doesn't say anything about a chimney or a fireplace in there. Generally, I will go ahead and make the common sense decision that yes, it's got a fireplace. I may give one out that doesn't, just for the heck of it, but I have to specify otherwise. It does have a fireplace inside there. A fortress is not much use if you can't heat the darn thing. Also, we had one game where the player was alone and there was a big horde of, I think it was gnolls or bugbears, I forget which, that were chasing him. So he came up with an idea. He was a little ways ahead of them. He dashed into the fortress, leaving the door open. I think it was bugbears. The bugbears followed him in. He climbed up to the top of the fortress, went out the hatch, closed the hatch behind him, and then he could levitate with boots of levitation, so he began to levitate and said the command word to shrink the fortress with a bunch of bugbears inside. That gave me some pause because I had to make a ruling on the spot how I was going to deal with that. And what I decided was that they would be trapped inside and that the mess would be considerable, and he would need somebody with something like a decanter of endless water to come hose the place out once he grew it back to normal size. So there's a few ways that this item has been weaponized in my campaign. I actually gave the player a lot of points for luring the the bugbears in before he shrank it down. I thought that was pretty clever gameplay. We've had similar scenarios since then, and that's one I'm not going to change. If you can get the monster to come in after you and then shrink this thing down, I'm going to let it happen. Now, if you do it against something like an earth elemental or something, I'm going to have the fortress take damage. One other quick thing, my friend Pat and his fortress with his character Lord Sluggo, that thing did take damage. It took quite a bit of damage over the course of his using it. I think it was down into the 90s on damage. So when he put it up, I would describe it as this old, battered, dented keep. He didn't want to expend any wishes that he could either pay a magic user to cast, or I don't think I gave out any wishes in the campaign. He didn't have any way to really fix it, so just over time, this thing was battered and bruised, and I think he actually took that as a badge of honor as well. So I thought that was kind of neat. Like I said, Pat was a very good role player and a very good sport about how to deal with stuff like this. So that's it. Just a quick look at Daern's Instant Fortress, a way to put up a nice little fortress if you got a piece of stable ground near a mountain pass that for whatever reason you want to control. You can put this thing up. There's no time limit on how long it stays up, and it doesn't talk about how it weathers. It is metal, but it doesn't talk about rust or not. So I would say, short of a rust monster or rust dust or something like that, I would say that this thing will not rust. It could be out in the elements and it will not rust, because it says it only takes damage by catapults or giants, that kind of thing. Dragon breath on this thing would do damage as well. So that's just my interpretation of the Daern's Instant Fortress. I'm interested in any comments or opinions you guys have, how ways you've used them in your campaign. Please leave comments below. And that's all I've got today. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time on page 121.